Our study of the book of Genesis, and we're prepared this morning for Genesis 39. Genesis 39 picks up the story where we left off in 37 with Joseph, who's been sold. And as verse 1 tells us, Joseph was brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him of the hands of the Ishmaelites, which had brought him down thither. And the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a prosperous man. And he was in the house of his master, an Egyptian. And his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all that he did, to prosper in his hand. And Joseph found grace in his sight. And he served him, and he made him overseer over his house. And all that he had, he put into his hand. Verse 5 says, "And it came to pass from the time that he made him the overseer in his house, and over all that he had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. And the blessing of the Lord was upon all that he had in the house and in the field. And he left all that he had in Joseph's hand, and he knew not aught that he had, save the bread which he did eat. And Joseph was a goodly person and well favored." A couple of things, that even though Joseph was in this very difficult situation, here he is sold into slavery, God had not forgotten him. God was with him. God blessed him. A prosperous man. That's a curious thing to say about a fellow who's in slavery. But everything that he did just worked out. He was a gifted fellow, and God blessed him providentially in terms of his work, his business, whatever he was doing. And we also find that this came into the notice of Potiphar, who recognized all of this. The last part of verse 6 tells us something else that will be important in the story. The old translation reads, "He was a goodly person and well favored." That's the end of verse 6. You've got another translation of that? Yeah. He was, one translation says he was well built and good looking, He was, that was Joseph, He was physically, mentally, and I think emotionally, an extraordinary man. Verse 7 says that it came to pass after these things that his master's wife cast her eyes upon Joseph, and she said, "Lie with me." Let me pause there a moment. It's just amazing. There's no situation the devil will not try to find a way to enter in and to work his evil work, to destroy, to ruin, to mar. You'd think, well, now Joseph has already suffered, but now he finds himself in another situation where he's in the crosshairs of the devil. And this temptation comes through the wife of Potiphar. She noticed him, and she lusted for him. Lust is not just a male problem. It's obviously not love. One reason we know that is because, well, as we go on and read the story, she doesn't have any problem trying to get him hung. This is not some deep, emotional, altruistic spirit. This is just lust that overrides everything else. So, casting her eyes upon Joseph, she propositioned him, and she wanted to commit adultery with him. And by the way, when you think about the situation here, a couple of things come to mind, don't they? In the first place, sometimes people say, well, people are young, they can't help it. Joseph was a young man, wasn't he? He was 17 when he was sold into slavery. I don't know how old he was at this point, how long it took to get to this point. But he was a young man. Young people can say no to sin. And something else that I think we find here is that she propositions him. Maybe she was attractive. Maybe that would have been appealing on that level. But other than the physical relationship, do you think there might have been some other advantages that she could just show Joseph? Perhaps so. Potiphar seems to have treated him well. But whatever the package here included. Whatever promises, whatever carnal inducements there were, the point is that as far as Joseph was concerned, it was unthinkable. And he goes on to explain why. He refused, verse 8, and said unto his master's wife, Behold, my master wotteth or knoweth not what is with me in the house, and he hath committed all that he hath to my hand. And there is none greater in his house than I. Neither hath he kept back anything from me but thee, because thou art his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? Let me pause there again. How many different ways does Joseph argue against saying yes here? What kind of things does he bring up to make it clear? This is unthinkable. What does he say? Yes, sir.
He makes reference to God. How can I sin against God? He says she's not involved in his reasoning for not sinning. It's just God.
Yeah, God is certainly the reason. Yeah, but there are other things he mentions. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I was just thinking, this clearly shows his character, because you take most people and put him in this situation that he's kind of, here he is, he's a slave, all this happened to him, and most people would be, why not? Hey, I'm going to do what I'm going to get what I can, and so he shows his character, and as was just mentioned, he brings God into the situation that shows that he's got an anchor, he's got something that's holding him where he needs to be.
All right. Is there anything else here? Yes, sir.
He also didn't want to do it against Potiphar because of what he'd done for him.
Yeah, he just felt like he betrayed this trust, this great trust that's been put into him. Yes. Yes, somebody else have another one. Maybe one more. What is it? He says, the only thing he's withheld from me is you. Why? Because, yes, sir.
You're his wife.
His wife.
You know, he was, Joseph basically freely had power over everything in that house except for her. He could have, the implication here is, I can eat anything that he eats. He doesn't care. But this is something else. This is something that is his and his alone. It's not mine to have.
Yeah.
Specifically.
So he says, I couldn't do that. I couldn't betray the trust. I think more of Potiphar than that. I think more of marriage than that. And I certainly think more of God than that. So for all those reasons, no. He refused. But the devil does not go away easily, does he? And so verse 10 says, It came to pass as she spoke to Joseph, day by day he hearkened not to her, to lie by her, or to be with her. Maybe I'm putting too much on that last phrase. Do you have another translation of verse 10, the last phrase there? Anybody have another translation of that? Some of the modern translations suggest just stay out of her way. Just don't toy with this. Don't tempt fate here, as sometimes people say. And so just to steer clear of her, not only say no, but to avoid the circumstance. But of course, he's a slave. He can't just quit his job and move. But verse 11 says the devil finds a way, to bring this to another level of a problem here. It came to pass about this time, Joseph went into the house to do his business, and it so happened there was nobody else in there with him. And I doubt he recognized that. Verse 12 says that she caught him, Potiphar's wife caught Joseph by his garment and said, Lie with me. And he left his garment and fled and got him out. I just find it instructive how that Joseph was determined not to be around this woman unless he just was forced to. And then when the situation came up as it did here, he just runs. He flees out of there. He's not toying with this circumstance. What do we find in passages like 1 Corinthians 6:18? Flee fornication. Paul wrote to Timothy, flee youthful lust. Do not think yourself so strong that it will not be of any hurt, any harm. I can handle it. So Joseph fled from the circumstance. And then, the wheels in her mind began to turn. Verse 13, when she saw that he had left his garment, then she concocted a lie to try to destroy him. That's how much she loved him. She called the men of her house and played on their prejudice. Oh, he's brought this foreigner in here to mock us, to make fools of us. And she tells this lie about how that Joseph was trying to force her. And she cried out. And she took that garment and she just put it by and waited till the husband got home. And she was going to feed him this lie. And she did. This Hebrew servant which you brought in here, verse 17, has come unto me to mock me. Rape me, I suppose we'd say. And I lifted up my voice and I cried, and he left the garment with me and fled out. And it came to pass, verse 19, that when the master heard the words of his wife, which she spake unto him, that his wrath was kindled. And Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, a place where the king's prisoners were bound. And he was there in the prison. One thing that I'll just mention, and maybe we won't solve this problem, but, through the years I have always thought of this as being, here's Potiphar and his domain, and then the prison was off somewhere else and another set over here. I think you can make a case, I can't prove it, that Potiphar was over the prison as well. And so he moves Joseph, in effect, from being the master of his house, servant of his house, steward, to being the steward of his prison in time. At first, I don't think he's moved over there to reward him, for sure. It was done in anger. But anyway, the point is that even when he's taken from a house servant to a prisoner, verse 21 says, the Lord was with Joseph, always was with Joseph, and showed him mercy and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. That's a strange way to say it if it was Potiphar, but maybe it just suggests now he's no longer on a first-name basis with Potiphar. But anyway, the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners that were in the prison. Whatever they did, he was the doer of it. And the keeper of the prison looked not to anything that was under his hand, because the Lord was with him, and that which he did, the Lord made it to prosper. So maybe that's why this sounds so familiar, because it wound up after a time being that he was also a trusted servant, even in prison, if no longer allowed in the house. I think it's Psalm 105, isn't it? Psalm 105, that a historic psalm that makes a brief reference to Joseph. Let me see if that's right. Psalm 105. And, where he's recounting history in verse 17 of Psalm 105. He sent a man before them, even Joseph, who was sold for a servant, whose feet they hurt with fetters, and he was laid in iron until the time that his word came. The word of the Lord tried him. And the king sent and loosed him, even the ruler of the people, and let him go free, and so on. It seems to me that he's describing here this imprisonment time, and for a time, Joseph's feet were said to be in fetters. I think that anger might have been displayed in putting him in the prison and treat him, let me show you what it's like to betray me or to mock me in some way. But over time, it seems that Joseph won back the favor of this keeper of the prison, and wound up being his right-hand man again, and a helper in administrating the prison, because the Lord was with him. He was always with him. Any question or point about chapter 39? Yes, sir.
Even if they weren't the same person, the keeper of the prison being a different person, it's entirely possible that person, just the administrative day over the prison, was still under Potiphar. Him being chief of the king's guard, it would be his responsibility to be the one that arrested these people and threw them into the prison in the first place. But you see how much mercy he had for Joseph here. I don't think anybody would have had him killed for the perceived slight on his wife, or had he thrown him in a commoner's prison or a dungeon where, or a situation where it was basically just a death sentence.
Yeah.
So there's a lot worse that could have happened from this situation, and I've seen people take liberty with it, and while I wouldn't say it, I don't, as far as for explanation type, don't necessarily condemn it when they say, well, perhaps Potiphar didn't believe his wife it would happen, but there really wasn't much choice there, because it was either, destroy his marriage and his station, as it would be, and all that, to reject her and choose a slave over her, or blame the slave. And there's, as far as social situations goes, even if he did not believe her, there's no situation where a man of his position would choose the slave in that situation.
Yeah. Someone else have a question? Yes, sir.
I think we can easily infer, based upon the character we've seen from Joseph already, that the Lord showed him mercy, allowed the chief jailer, or for him to find favor in the eyes of the chief jailer, based upon Joseph's consistent character and righteousness.
Right.
This wasn't arbitrary. It's not, well, no matter what you do, you'll prosper. But it was consistent with him trusting in God.
Yes, absolutely. And those two are not mutually exclusive, are they? If we hold to God's word and he blesses us, I think both can be true. That's right. That's right. Yes, sir.
The other thing we'll note, just as this entire story, we think back to when we talked about Jacob and Esau, Jacob deceived Esau, and later on, Laban deceives him. Everybody is reaping what they sowed. The brothers had sold him into slavery, and of course, eventually, the same will happen to their children. But this broadly follows the arc of the Israelites as a people. He has a more honored. They come and they serve Pharaoh, not quite as slaves like Joseph was in Potiphar's house, but in a more honored position and area in Goshen there. And then they're brought lower. They're put into actual chains of slavery for a while, and then the Lord will come and bring them out and deliver them to be in an honored position to be his people.
Right. The story continues in chapter 40. It came to pass after these things that the butler of the king of Egypt and the baker offended their lord, the king of Egypt. The Lord was wroth against two of his officers, against the chief of the butlers and against the chief of the bakers. And he put them in ward in the house of the captain of the guard, into the prison, the place where Joseph was bound. So it's interesting too, how that the Lord's timing, providence, his work here is just breathtaking, really. Here are two high officials. These are not two nobodies. The butler, that'd be basically, I guess, the same kind of position that Nehemiah held, wouldn't it? Many years later, different circumstance. But these were two men close proximity to the Pharaoh. And they offended, and we don't know any more about that. I can assume from what happens that maybe the baker was indeed guilty, truly, of a more heinous offense, as he is not shown mercy in the end. But at any rate, these two men are in the prison, and there's Joseph. He would never have had contact with these fellows otherwise, but God works it out. And we can see the bigger plan because we know the story. They both dreamed a dream, verse 5 tells us, in one night. And the dream was such that they recognized this is a dream with a message. This is a dream that has a supernatural quality to it. So in the morning, after that fitful night, Joseph comes into them and he says something rather interesting. He says, why are you guys so sad? Well, there might be several answers to that. But I think that the word sad there maybe carries with it more than just the idea of, well, after all, you shouldn't be happy in prison on average. But it's a word which means to boil. It's the idea of being just fervent with agitation, I suppose. They're frustrated because they know they've been sent a message, as far as they're concerned, this dream, but they have no way to get to those who can interpret dreams, as they could have before. When they were free, they knew people. There were folks in the palace who had that work. But verse 8, Joseph says to them, the latter part of that verse, do not interpretations belong to God? Knowledge of the future is not the purview of the occult and the occultist. That belongs to God. So he says, tell me the dream. So the chief butler starts out, and he tells him this dream about a vine, 3 branches that come forth from it, clusters of grapes, Pharaoh's cups in his hand. He squeezes the grapes into Pharaoh's cups and serves him. And Joseph says, yes, this is the interpretation of that dream. The 3 branches are 3 days. And within 3 days shall Pharaoh lift up thine head and restore thee unto thy place, and thou shalt deliver Pharaoh's cup into his hand after the former manner when thou wast his butler. And he says, this is important. And when that happens, think on me when it shall be well with thee, and show kindness. Make mention of me to Pharaoh. I'm not a criminal. I've been, as it were, sold into slavery unjustly. The chief baker heard all this, you remember, he said, well, that sounds pretty good. So he said, let me tell you my dream. And his dream involved 3 white baskets on his head. And the uppermost basket, all manner of baked goods for Pharaoh, and the birds came and picked it and ate it. And Joseph said, here's your interpretation. This is your dream. Within 3 days, Pharaoh shall lift up your head from off your body, he said. And you will be eaten. Your flesh will be eaten by the birds. Different ending to that story, isn't there? Well, it came to pass, verse 20 tells us, on the 3rd day, Pharaoh's birthday, that he was celebrating, and he called for these 2 men, one to be restored and the other called to be hung. The old translation reads, I'm not sure that when a word like that is used, that it has in mind the Old West, asphyxiation, where you take somebody and string them up by a rope in the old cowboy movies. But rather the idea of someone who is executed and impaled, hung, that is, hung to be displayed. Rather gruesome picture. All of it's gruesome. But that was the end of this baker. But when that chief butler was restored, in verse 23, he did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. Forgot him. I think that, again, I can't be sure about this, but I wonder if he forgot him in the sense that his memory failed, or he just not want to rock the boat, as it were, and just let him be in the background. Don't need him anymore. I don't know. Later he'll try to rectify the situation. Maybe he did get so caught up in the situation he just forgot. But that's an important event that takes place because it's another step towards something remarkable. You think about the things that happened in Joseph's life, and many of them were not pleasant. But you think about the great timing of this, and about how that if Joseph had been remembered at this point, and if he had been told, Pharaoh had been told by this newly pardoned butler, listen, there's a guy in prison you really ought to know about. And you think that would have had much effect? Maybe not. 2 years go by. But he will be brought up, and when he is, it's at the perfect time. I tell you one thing that I try to do when I read these stories, and I'm sure I'm not alone. You just try to remember that my time is not God's time, and God's time is always right. Always right. It will help me to be settled in my mind when I realize that. Things are not happening like I think they should, when they should. Trust God. Yes, sir.
I just found the Bible to say when it was the proper time or when the time was fulfilled.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just the right time for it to happen.
You know, Christ came into the world at the right time. So, chapter 41. It came to pass at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh dreamed. And he dreamed about the riverbank, and out of the river coming these cattle, 7 well-favored cattle, and then the 7 ill-favored that came up and ate the 7 well-favored. And then he awoke, I suppose, in terror at this. This would have been a very gruesome picture. He went back to sleep, and he dreamed that same night, a second time, about this time 7 heads of grain that are standing in a stalk, and then 7 heads of grain, the poorest looking grain you've ever seen. And these 7 ears of grain devour the first. And then he wakes up again, and behold, it was a dream. And in the morning, troubled as he was, he sought for the magicians and the wise men. Verse 8 of Egypt. Magicians suggests do you have another translation of the word magician there in verse 8? And wise men? Nobody's got another translation of that? Okay. Well, pardon?
It's a notation of sacred scribes.
Sacred scribes, okay. It has to do with writing. Yes.
I was going to say, I know later on, like as far as the Babylonians are concerned, sometimes the magicians and wise men includes the astrologers.
Yeah. Horoscopist, I think one said. So this is people, again, dealing with a lot of times the occult. The wise men, maybe just the clever fellows, the learned men, the counselors, the advisors. These are the people the king might go to if it's some mysterious thing happened like this. And they could not interpret the dream. They did not know what these dreams meant. And it was then, 2 years later, that the chief butler says to Pharaoh, thinking this is a good time to mention this, maybe I can step up and provide something. He says, I remember my faults this day. That word fault is otherwise translated sin. He said, Pharaoh was angry with me, and he goes back through the story at the time, and I was in the king's prison. And I dreamed a dream, both of us did, myself and that no good baker that you killed. And there was a young man there, verse 12, a Hebrew, a servant of the captain of the guard. That's an interesting way to say that too, if it's Potiphar. A servant of the captain of the guard. And we told him our dreams, and he interpreted the dreams, and it came true just as he said. Verse 14. Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they brought him hastily out of the dungeon. That word dungeon is a word for a holding place. It's the same word that's used for the pit that Joseph was thrown into back when his brothers decided to seize him. So in this rather negative, dark picture here, as the word dungeon would suggest, but he's coming out of that hole, and he gets clean and proper before he will stand before Pharaoh. What's going through Joseph's mind at this time? There are all kinds of questions that are not answered for us. You know, this is just exactly how I expected it to work. I'd just be down here one day working, and suddenly I get the call and say, Pharaoh wants to see you. Well, sure he does. Of course. It just seems like Joseph in every situation, no situation was too big for him because no situation is too big for his God. So he doesn't know, I think, what's going to happen the next day. But he's ready for the moment. So he's brought before Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I have dreamed, verse 15, I have dreamed a dream, and none can interpret it. And I have heard say of thee that thou canst understand a dream to interpret it. And Joseph said, well, I can't deny that. I've always had this thing with dreams. Me and dreams go back a long way. When I was at home, that's not what he said, is it? He said, it is not me. God shall give Pharaoh the answer of peace, an answer that will settle your mind and bring peace to your heart. So he tells him the dream again about the riverbank, about these cows that come up. 7 cows, fat-fleshed and well-favored. They are the sturdiest, best-looking cattle. And they're feeding in the meadow. And then he looks back at the water, and here are 7 of the worst, scrawniest-looking cows you ever saw. Never saw so bad an example of cattle. And they came and ate up, consumed, cannibalized these 7 fat fish. But they didn't get any bigger. Didn't help them. They still were scrawny, ugly-looking cattle. And then he said, I awoke. I dreamed another dream about the 7 ears. 7 ears that were full and good, that were consumed by 7 ears that followed, that were withered and thin, like they were blasted with the east wind, the Scirocco off the desert. And Joseph explains to Pharaoh what this means. He says, in the first place, it's the same message in 2 dreams. The dreams are one. And what's happening is that God, the true God, is showing to Pharaoh what's about to happen, what he's about to do. That's interesting too. Not just what's going to happen, but what he is going to do. Is God involved in the drought business? Is he involved in the growing business? He's involved in all of it. That's all a part of his providence. So he says in verse 26, second thing, first thing is the dreams are one. Both dreams speak to the same point. The second place, he says, the 7, and the 7 are 7 years. That's the idea. The significance of that number is that it represents the number of years that are going to be good and the number of years that are going to be bad. And what he's talking about here in verse 27 is there's going to be a famine. 7 years of plenty will be followed by an overwhelming famine. Now, why tell Pharaoh this? Verse 28. This is the thing which I have spoken unto Pharaoh, what God is about to do. He shows Pharaoh. Behold, there come, verse 29, 7 years of great plenty throughout all the land of Egypt. This is not localized. This will be regional. And there shall arise after them 7 years of famine, and all the plenty shall be forgotten in the land of Egypt, and the famine shall consume the land, and the plenty shall not be known in the land by reason of the famine. It shall be very grievous. The dream was doubled. Why 2 dreams? Verse 32 explains, it was doubled because God will shortly bring it to pass. So Joseph has explained through the power of God to Pharaoh the message that he intends to give. Verse 33. Here's what you ought to do in response to this gift of a message. Now therefore let Pharaoh look out a man discreet and wise, and set him over the land of Egypt. You need somebody intelligent and capable to begin to handle these matters for you. Let Pharaoh do this. Let him appoint officers over the land, and take up a 5th part of the land of Egypt in the 7 plenteous years. That phrase has been debated a little bit, but it seems evident that what he's talking about is take up a 20% tax, if you will, on the crops, on the land, and store that up. By the way, you can imagine how popular that was when things were going well. How the people of the land would just been so glad to have handed over 20% They might have said, boy, these people are so greedy. We just start getting on our feet, then look at them coming in here trying to swoop in and take. Well, sometimes that's true, but in this case, there was something behind it. It was a divine wisdom behind it. So, take up this 20% in the 7 plenteous years. Verse 35, let them gather all the food of those good years that come, and lay up corn under the hand of Pharaoh. Keep them in storehouses in the cities. Store up this bounty against, verse 36, the 7 years of famine, which shall be in the land of Egypt. Just as sure as I'm talking to you, it'll be coming. That the land perish not through the famine. So, what was the purpose of these dreams? It was, I think, to save lives. Not just Egyptian lives, but lives all around, to save people from starving to death. This is the gift that God gave to Pharaoh. Well, this was very much pleasing to those who heard it. They appreciated the wisdom of it. They could see the importance of it. Joseph had suggested, you need to find a wise fellow to administer this. And Pharaoh said, who would be better than this guy? Can we find such a one as this? Verse 38. A man in whom is the Spirit of God? Again in verse 39, Pharaoh said unto Joseph, forasmuch as God has showed thee all this, there is none so discreet and so wise as thou art. Just in passing. I hope and pray that as you and I go about our work from day to day, our business, our recreation, whatever it is, that when people are through with their interaction with us, they come away with a greater appreciation of God. Don't you find that to be a powerful lesson? I don't want people to be impressed with me or with you. I want them to be impressed with the God that we serve. We can find a way to make that clear, can't we? I've said before, I really think that's probably the root of what Peter wrote many, many years later when he said, if any man speak, let him speak as the oracles of God. If any man minister, let him do it according to the gift that God gives. Always in our activities, in our family, in our business, at school, wherever we are, to let people see God live in us and to take that away. Your God is a great God. Let that be the effect of our work. That's our hope, our ambition. So Pharaoh elevates Joseph. It's just amazing, isn't it? Every time we read this. Verse 39, Pharaoh said to Joseph, forasmuch as God has showed thee this, and there's none as discreet or as wise as you are, you'll be over my house. At thy word all the people shall be ruled. Only in the throne shall I be greater than thee. I have set thee over all the land of Egypt. This is the guy who was sold by his brothers, started as a slave, then wound up in prison. And now he's the second man in Egypt. It's just mind-boggling. You know, what God can do, what God has done. So, what Pharaoh does in verse 42, he put off his ring from his hand, put it on Joseph's hand, arrayed him in his vestures, fine linen, put a gold chain on his neck, gave him to ride in the second chariot. What's the purpose of all of this, you suppose?
To let everybody know.
This
Who's in charge.
is the man, yeah. So this gives sanction, doesn't it? It reminds you a little bit of what David did. You know, when there was a question about the succession, when David was dying, he said, call Solomon. Let's just do this right now. Let everybody see. He's the choice. Joseph is the choice. Pharaoh said to Joseph, verse 44, I am Pharaoh. Without thee shall no man lift up his hand or foot in all the land of Egypt. And he gave him, in addition to these signs of power, a new name, Zaphnath-Pahaneah, verse 45. And what I find interesting is nobody seems to be sure what that means. It seems to have a meaning. One of my favorites is somebody said it means the Savior of the world. Maybe that's right. Maybe not. I don't know. They don't know either. But Zophnath-Paneah doesn't sound much like Joseph, does it? By the way, you got a little note in your book about that? Yes, sir.
This one says, probably Egyptian, for God speaks and he lives.
There you go. It's one of those two or something else. That's right. It's something good, I'm sure. He was a savior, wasn't he? So it is. But the point is that from now on, that's what he'll be known by, Zophnath-Paneah. That's the name the brothers will hear when they get there. So, he's also given a wife, Asenath, who is the daughter of a priest of On, which was a major city in Egypt. But one thing I find interesting is that though he's given an Egyptian name and an Egyptian wife, he never ceases to be a Hebrew. And when his children are born, Manasseh and Ephraim, those are Hebrew names. So I think that's telling as well. He doesn't join in with the idolatry of the land, even though he is given here an Egyptian wife and an Egyptian name. He's 30 years old when he stands before Pharaoh. How old was he when he was sold into slavery? You remember? 17. Now he's 30. All the events that took place in Potiphar's house and the prison happened in those 13 years. But now, Joseph is exactly where God intends for him to be at the moment he needs to be. He goes throughout that land of Egypt during those 7 years of plenty, I suppose. And the 7 years of plenty brought forth just as God predicted. But the famine is coming. Verse 50 does mention how that he had 2 sons. And this is also interesting and deserves more time than we'll give it. His firstborn was Manasseh. What does that mean, Manasseh? Forgetting? Because why? For he said, why did he name him that?
It made me forget all of mine. It's the old version says toil. I think that the laborious trial that he did through in his father's house. I think that means the things that he had the suffering that he had.
That's interesting, though. Make me forget my father's house. I don't think he forgot his father. I think he was glad to see him. But I tell you what I take from that, and I don't know that I appreciated this as much. The second name, Ephraim. What does Ephraim mean? Fruitful. Because why? God made me fruitful in the land of mine affliction. What I take from this is that Joseph was a man, despite all he had been through, who did not give in to bitterness. He wasn't sitting around brooding, plotting revenge. This is not the Count of Monte Cristo here. And sometimes people might be tempted to say, well, it's easy for him. He had it not. He did not have it smooth, did he? We know his story.
He spent 13 years as a slave and in jail.
Yeah. And then to be forgotten by the man he helped. There's just all kind of reasons. If you're looking for a reason to be bitter, he's got them. He was not. He was not. He didn't forget God. He didn't forget who he was. And that, I think, is extraordinary. So the 7 years of famine come. In verse 55, all the land of Egypt was famished. Have they not been putting back in those years of plenty? Obviously not. People generally don't. They come to Pharaoh. Pharaoh says, go to Joseph. And guess what? Everybody needs help. Not just Egyptians, but all the land. And they will receive help from God. All those countries includes the family of Israel, as we'll find out in the next chapter. So, okay, thank you very much. Appreciate your kind attention this morning.